In this game, Grandmaster Halmov found a phenomenal piece sacrifice that gained him the first brilliancy prize. After the opening, it seemed that his opponent, David Bronstein, was ready to grab the initiative, as Halmov's pieces were seemingly passive. However, Halmov unexpectedly sacrificed a piece, after which the great hidden potential of his seemingly passive pieces came to light. Halmov started with e4, Bronstein played the Sicilian Defense, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, d6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, a6. Bronstein is playing the Najdorf variation, and Halmov opted for the variation with bishop g5. e6, f4. Of course, in the Najdorf, white is playing actively on the king side, while black is playing actively on the queen side. Bishop e7, queen f3, activating the queen and preparing the long castle, queen c7, long castle, knight d7, g4. White has started the pawn storm on the king side, and black does the same on the queen side, b5. Black now can play b4 further in the game, harassing the knight, which is defending the e4 pawn, and by playing b5, black also vacated the b7 square for the bishop, from which it will exert a very strong pressure on the long diagonal and attack the e4 pawn. Bishop takes f6. Now black has two options, either to capture with the knight or with a pawn, and both variations have their advantages and drawbacks. The advantage of knight takes f6 is that the pawn structure on the king side remains intact. However, that lets white play g5 with tempo. Bronstein opted for the second variation. He captured with a pawn. The drawback, of course, is that now the pawn structure on the king side is weakened. However, white doesn't have a chance to play g5 with tempo. And Halmov immediately attacks black's main weakness, f5, namely the e6 pawn. However, f5 has its drawback too. It seriously weakens the e5 square, and Bronstein immediately exploits this, centralizing his knight with tempo and opening the bishop's diagonal. Now the e6 pawn is defended. However, queen h3, and the queen is indirectly attacking the e6 pawn. Now, seemingly active move b4 would have been an inaccuracy because of simple knight e2 followed by knight f4, and the knight together with the second knight and the pawn would increase the pressure on e6. That's why instead of b4, Bronstein simply castled kingside. And Halmov keeps playing actively and straightforwardly. g5, opening the queen's diagonal, attacking. Now white is simply threatening to capture on e6 because e6 is attacked 3 times, and also threatening to play g takes f, opening the g file, which would be very unpleasant for black. And Bronstein plays b4, which is a mistake. Halmov calls this move too brave. Instead of b4, Halmov offers f takes g, and after f takes e, knight takes e6, attacking the queen, queen d7, knight d5, queen takes e6, bishop takes e6, and knight takes e7 check. According to Halmov, this endgame would have been more or less equal. However, Bronstein played b4. But it's not clear why b4 is a mistake. First, Halmov captures on f6, with tempo opening the g file. After bishop takes f6, he played rook g1, activating his rook with tempo, check, king h8, now he played queen h6, attacking both the rook and the bishop, but Bronstein simply plays queen e7, defending the both pieces. And what to do now? It seems that Bronstein is ready to grab the initiative, because the white knight is under attack, the knight is defending the pawn. After the knight retreats, Bronstein was going to play bishop b7 with tempo, developing the bishop, attacking the unguarded pawn on e4 and connecting his rooks. After that, he would have played rook g8 and would have completely consolidated his position. However, it wasn't that simple, because black has a serious weakness in his position, namely the h7 pawn. It is very weak, and the defense of this pawn is problematic because the communication between the queen side and the king side in black's position is broken, because of the f7 pawn. The black pieces, the queen from e7 or even the rook from a7 cannot defend it. The only defender of the h7 pawn is the king. However, white is attacking the h7 pawn only once with his queen. And that, of course, isn't enough. White must attack it for the second time in order to create the checkmating threats. But how to do it? The rooks cannot do it. The d1 rook cannot be rerouted to h3 because of the knight, of course. Knight would simply capture it. And the g1 rook cannot move to h3 either after rook g3 and rook h3. As soon as the rook moves away from the g file, black would simply play deadly bishop g5 check with the double attack, and white would simply lose the queen. However, Halmov found a fantastic solution. You can pause the video and try to find it. I will just give you a small tip. Find a white piece which can join the attack of h7 and find the way to do it effectively and quickly. So, the second piece that will attack h7 is the light squared bishop from d3. At first sight, it's impossible to believe it, because there are two pawns on its way, the e4 pawn and f5 pawn. Besides that, the e4 pawn is blocked by the knight, so how to move away this pawn in order to open the diagonal. Besides that, the knight controls the d3 square, so it looks absolutely impossible. But Halmov found a solution. Knight c6, attacking the queen. So black must accept the sacrifice. Halmov left his attacked knight under attack and offered the sacrifice of the second knight. Black must accept it, and now we can see the idea. The e5 square is unblocked, and Halmov immediately uses that. e5 with tempo, attacking the bishop. Besides that, the e4 square is vacated, and the knight, if needed, will jump on e4 with great effect. So, black can capture on e5 by a pawn, the knight, and the bishop. If d takes e, black is losing on the spot, after simple knight e4, and white is threatening deadly knight takes f6, followed by checkmate on h7. The only way to avoid the checkmate would be, in this case, bishop g5 check, in order to unblock the f pawn, so that after knight takes g5, white is threatening checkmate, but black can play f6, opening the queen's way, defending h7, but simply knight takes h7 would have followed, and black's position simply collapses. Of course, black cannot capture the knight because of simple queen takes f8. If bishop takes e5, then black would be ready to play f6 in order to defend the h7, but white wouldn't have let black do it by playing f6, again blocking the f-pawn and threatening checkmate, of course. After bishop takes f6, the bishop again is blocking the pawn, and now bishop d3 with great effect, threatening checkmate on h7. The only move to avoid the checkmate would be bishop g5 check, but simply rook takes g5. Now, white is still threatening checkmate, of course. If f6 in order to defend the pawn, then simply rook g3 as the rook was attacked, and after b takes c, simply bishop takes h7, and again black cannot capture for the same reason. Queen takes f8 checkmate. That's why after rook takes g5 instead of f6, Halmov in his annotations suggests f5 in order to close the bishop's diagonal, but simply rook g1, threatening deadly rook g7, attacking the queen and threatening checkmate on h7. In this case, black could have played rook a7, defending the g7 square again, but now knight e2, threatening deadly knight f4, followed by knight g6 check with a fork, winning the queen, and after knight e5, still knight f4, the knight on e5 is controlling the g6 square, but the white knight will jump on h5, taking under control the g7, and the invasion of the rook on g7 would be inevitable, after which white will simply checkmate. That's why the best way to play for black would have been knight takes e5. However, knight e4 would have followed, again attacking the bishop, and after knight g6, closing the queen's line, so that the bishop is defended now by the queen, but simply knight takes f6, queen takes f6, f takes g, queen g7, because white was threatening simply checkmate, queen g7, exchange of the queens, g takes f check, king takes f7, rook takes d6. According to Halmov, that was the best way to play for black. Of course, white is better, white has some advantage in this position. Materially, it's equal, of course, but white rooks are much more actively placed than the black rooks. Besides that, black pawns are weak, and they will turn into the target of attack. However, still black could have continued the resistance in this variation. Instead of all this, Bronstein didn't capture on e5 and played bishop g5 check instead. So his idea was to unblock the f-pawn, sacrificing a piece. However, after rook takes g5, f6, now the h7 is defended, and the rook is under attack, and the knight is under attack. So Bronstein defended h7, and he will also win a piece. So that was his idea. However, simply e takes d, attacking the queen, queen f7, rook g3, b takes c, so black is a piece up, but a very strong move. Bishop c4, completely paralyzing black's position. Now the e6 pawn is pinned, it cannot move, and that means white will simply capture on e6. C takes b check, king b1. Of course, Halmov didn't capture the pawn, because the pawn will now block. It will be white king's best defender, because it is blocking, closing the b file. And as the e6 pawn is under attack, and white is simply threatening to capture it, and if bishop captures, the queen won't be able to capture it because of simply checkmate on g7. That's why Bronstein played knight d8, defending the e6 pawn with the knight. And here Halmov missed an immediate victory. He had a simple move d7. So black, of course, cannot capture the pawn because of simply rook takes d7, and after queen takes d7, queen takes f8 checkmate. That's why black would be forced to play bishop b7, but now simply rook g1, and there is no way black can defend against rook g7. Instead of this, Halmov played rook g1. However, white's position is still absolutely winning. So white is threatening rook g7, that's why Bronstein played rook a7, which wouldn't have been the case in case Halmov played d7 a move earlier. But now he plays d7, which is also very effective. Now, if the bishop captures on d7, the bishop would have closed the rook's line, and white would be able to invade g7. That's why Bronstein captured with the rook. However, on d7, the rook is closing the bishop's diagonal, and now Halmov can capture on e6. Knight takes e6, bishop takes e6. Of course, the queen cannot capture because of queen takes f8, followed by checkmate. That's why Bronstein played rook d1 check, rook takes d1, bishop takes e6, king takes b2, rook b8 check, king a1, bishop takes a2, and a strong move by Halmov, rook d3, doubling on the d file and threatening deadly rook d8 check, and also rook d7 with a decisive invasion on the 7th rank. In order to parry both of these threats, black must move the queen. However, the queen is defending the bishop. So Bronstein played queen e7, taking under control the d8 square so that the rook cannot invade d8, and also threatening queen e5 check. But the bishop is unguarded, and Halmov, of course, captured it. And after queen e6 check, rook b3, it turned out that white is simply a rook up and black has no compensation. That's why Bronstein in this position resigned. And now I recommend watching the 11th game of the 1951 World Chess Championship match, in which Bronstein demonstrated phenomenal defensive and counter-attacking skills. But first, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.